The knocking started at 11:37 p.m., not the polite tap of a neighbor, not the rhythmic knock of someone delivering a package left at the wrong door. This was metal on wood, hard, insistent, designed to wake and intimidate. Open the door. Police. Inside the third-floor apartment, 72-year-old Margaret Holloway woke to the sound of her own heartbeat. The knocking grew louder. She reached for her glasses on the nightstand, hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from being ripped out of sleep. Ma'am, I know you're in there. Open this door right now. Margaret rose slowly, wrapping her robe around herself. Her late husband had been a criminal defense attorney for 34 years. She knew what authority sounded like when it was being performed rather than exercised. She approached the door, but did not open it. Officer, I need to know why you're here. I don't owe you an explanation. Open the door. You're at the wrong apartment. I haven't called anyone. The voice on the other side sharpened. Lady, I don't have time for this. You either open this door or I'm coming in anyway. Your choice. Margaret's hand hovered over the deadbolt. The doorbell camera mounted beside the frame was recording. She'd installed it 6 months ago after her husband died. Not because she was afraid, but because she was alone. I'm not opening my door without knowing why you're here. There was a pause. Then the sound of metal sliding into a lock. Too late. The date was October 14th. Kids in Riverside Terrace Apartments, a modest mid-rise complex in a city that prided itself on community policing and progressive reform rhetoric. The kind of place where retired teachers, widows, and young families lived side by side in relative quiet. Officer Derek Milhouse had been with the department for 9 years, not long enough to be a veteran, long enough to be comfortable. He worked the late shift by choice, fewer supervisors, fewer witnesses, more discretion. His personnel file showed 3 prior complaints, 2 for unprofessional conduct, 1 for excessive use of authority. All 3 had been marked unfounded or insufficient evidence. He'd been called to Riverside Terrace that night on a noise complaint. Apartment 4C, loud music, possible domestic disturbance. Dispatch had given him the address twice, but Milhouse hadn't written it down. He'd been to the complex before. He knew the layout, or thought he did. When he arrived, the third-floor hallway was silent. No music, no shouting, just the low hum of fluorescent lights and the faint smell of carpet cleaner. He walked past 3A, 3B, stopped at 3C. The apartment number on the door was slightly crooked, 1 screw missing. He knocked, no response. He knocked again, harder this time. His radio was clipped to his chest, but he didn't check the address. Didn't call dispatch for confirmation. The door in front of him was closed, and in his mind, that was enough. Inside, Margaret Holloway had been asleep for less than 2 hours. She'd spent the evening sorting through her late husband's case files, a task she'd been putting off for months. There were banker's boxes stacked in the corner of the living room, each one labeled in his careful handwriting. Criminal procedure, civil rights, appellate briefs. She didn't know it yet, but those files would matter. When the knocking started, her first thought was that someone had the wrong apartment. It happened occasionally, delivery drivers, neighbors looking for a friend, but the tone of the knocking told her this was different. By the time she reached the door, Officer Milhouse was already speaking. Open the door, police. Margaret was not the type to panic. She'd watched her husband cross-examine detectives, dismantle police testimony, and walk juries through the Fourth Amendment with the precision of a surgeon. She knew her rights. She also knew that knowing your rights and surviving an encounter with someone who didn't care about them were 2 very different things. She kept the door closed. Officer, I need to know why you're here. The response came fast, clipped, dismissive. I don't owe you an explanation. Open the door. Margaret felt her jaw tighten. The hallway camera mounted near the elevator was too far away to capture audio, but the doorbell camera she'd installed, the small, unassuming lens mounted beside her doorframe, was 3 feet from Officer Milhouse's face, and it was recording everything. Margaret Holloway had not always been alone. For 34 years, she'd been married to Samuel Holloway, a defense attorney known in the county for his meticulous trial preparation and his refusal to plea bargain cases he believed were defensible. He'd handled everything from misdemeanors to federal civil rights lawsuits. His clients called him relentless. Prosecutors called him difficult. Judges respected him because he never wasted the court's time with theatrics-only evidence. He died 7 months earlier. Heart attack. No warning. Margaret had spent 3 decades as a high school English teacher. She graded essays, refereed teenage drama, and learned how to speak with authority without raising her voice. Retirement had been quiet, too quiet. Samuel's debt had made the apartment feel cavernous. She'd installed the doorbell camera in April, not out of paranoia, but practicality. The building had decent security, but she was a woman living alone in a city where property crime was climbing. The camera cost $89. It connected to her phone. It stored footage in the cloud. She hadn't expected to need it for this. Now, standing in her entryway at 11:47 p.m., Margaret's mind worked quickly. She did not recognize the voice on the other side of the door. She had not called the police. She had not heard any disturbance in the building. The officer had not identified himself beyond the word police, had not provided a reason for contact, and was now demanding entry without a warrant, without exigent circumstances, without anything resembling legal justification. Her husband's voice played in her head, a memory from a dinner conversation years ago. The moment they stop explaining themselves is the moment you stop cooperating. I'm not opening my door without knowing why you're here, she said, her voice steady. There was a pause. She heard the faint crackle of a radio, but no words. Then the officer spoke again, and this time the irritation was audible. Lady, I don't have time for this. You either open this door, or I'm coming in anyway. Your choice. Margaret's hand moved instinctively to her phone in a robe pocket. She unlocked it without looking, muscle memory guiding her thumb to the doorbell camera app. The live feed loaded. She could see him now, a uniformed officer, mid-30s, buzz cut, standing with his shoulders squared and his jaw set. His hand was resting on his duty belt. He looked annoyed, not concerned, not cautious, annoyed. Margaret had seen this before, not in person, but in the dozens of police misconduct videos her husband had reviewed for cases. The posture, the tone, the assumption that compliance was owed, not earned. She did not open the door. Officer, I'm a 72-year-old woman. I'm alone. I haven't called for help. If you have a legitimate reason to be here, I'll cooperate. But I need you to tell me what that reason is. The response was immediate. I don't owe you anything. Last chance. Margaret heard a metallic sound, keys maybe, or a tool sliding into the lock. Her breath caught. She stepped back from the door. You're making a mistake, she said quietly. The officer didn't respond. The lock turned. The door swung open. Officer Derek Milhouse stepped inside without invitation, without announcement, without legal authority. He saw an elderly woman in a bathrobe, standing in a dimly lit living room surrounded by cardboard boxes. He saw no threat, no emergency, no justification for what he'd just done. But he also saw no consequences. Not yet. Margaret stood very still, her phone still in her hand, the doorbell cameras still recording. She did not raise her voice. She did not move toward him. She simply looked at him and spoke in the same calm, measured tone she'd used with 1,000 students who thought they could talk their way out of a failing grade. You just entered my home without permission, without a warrant, and without exigent circumstances. Do you understand what you've done? Officer Milhouse smirked. Lady, I don't care who you think you are. Officer Milhouse stepped further into the apartment, his boots heavy on the hardwood floor. The sound echoed in the small, space-deliberate, territorial. Margaret didn't move. She stayed near the corner of the living room, her phone still clutched in her hand, the screen glowing faintly in the dim light. You need to leave, she said. Milhouse's eyes swept the room. He saw the cardboard boxes stacked against the wall, the labels written in neat black marker. He saw the small dining table with a single chair. He saw an elderly woman who, in his mind, had wasted his time. I'll leave when I'm done, he said. You got ID? Margaret felt her pulse quicken, but her voice remained level. Officer, you entered my home illegally. I don't have to provide you with anything. Milhouse's jaw tightened. He took another step forward, close enough now that Margaret could smell the faint odor of stale coffee on his breath, and the synthetic fabric of his uniform sharp chemical, like it had been dry cleaned too many times. That's not how this works. ID. Now. Margaret did not comply. Instead, she spoke with the same measured precision her husband had used in depositions. You have no reasonable suspicion to demand identification. You have no warrant. You have no exigent circumstances. What you have is an illegal entry under the Fourth Amendment, a policy violation under your own department's use of force continuum, and exposure to civil liability under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. Milhouse blinked. For a moment, he seemed thrown, not by fear, but by irritation. He wasn't used to being lectured. Certainly not by a 72-year-old woman in a bathrobe. You people always have an excuse, he said, his voice hardening. You think you know the law because you watch YouTube videos? Margaret didn't respond immediately. She let the silence sit between them, heavy and deliberate. The fluorescent light in the hallway outside flickered once, casting a brief shadow across the open doorway. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed softly. I'm asking you to leave, she said again. Milhouse shook his head, a short, dismissive gesture. You're not asking me anything. You're going to show me your ID, or you're going to come with me for instruction. Margaret's hand tightened around her phone. She could feel the ridges of the case pressing into her palm, the weight of it grounding her. She did not look at the screen. She didn't need to. The doorbell camera had already captured him forcing the lock. The audio was clean. The lighting was clear. His face was centered in the frame. Obstruction requires a lawful order, Margaret said. You haven't given one. Milhouse's expression shifted. The irritation gave way to something colder, condescension mixed with authority. He stepped closer, close enough that Margaret could see the small scar above his left eyebrow and the way his name tag was slightly crooked on his chest. Keep talking and see what happens, he said quietly. Margaret's mind cataloged every detail. The threat vague but deliberate. The invasion of personal space. The refusal to de-escalate. The assumption that she would fold under pressure. She didn't fold. You're digging yourself deeper, she said. Every second you remain here without legal justification is another count of unlawful detention. Every threat you make is another example of official misconduct. You're creating a federal case in real time. Milhouse laughed, a short, bitter sound that felt more like a bark. Lady, I've been doing this for 9 years. You think you're the first person to throw legal words at me? I know my job. Margaret tilted her head slightly, studying him. Do you? The question landed like a needle in soft tissue. Milhouse's expression darkened. He reached for his radio, keyed the mic, and spoke without taking his eyes off her. 742, show me on scene at Riverside Terrace. One contact, possible forfeiting. The dispatcher's voice crackled back. Copy 742. What's your location? Milhouse paused. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. He glanced at the open doorway, at the apartment number mounted beside it, 3C. He'd been sent to 4C. Margaret saw it, the brief hesitation, the trim-wani tightening of his shoulders. He knew, not fully perhaps, but enough. He didn't correct himself on the radio. Riverside Terrace, 3rd floor, he said. All clear for now. The dispatcher acknowledged, and the radio went silent. Milhouse clipped it back to his chest and turned his attention back to Margaret. The mistake had been made, but in his mind it didn't matter. He was here now. She was uncooperative now. That was enough to justify staying. You want to make this difficult, he said. Fine. Turn around. Hands behind your back. Margaret's breath caught. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. She could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the barely audible buzz of the hallway lights outside. Her husband's case files sat in their boxes, silent witnesses. You're arresting me, she asked. You're being detained for obstruction and failure to identify. Margaret did not turn around. She stood perfectly still, her phone still in her hand, her voice calm and surgical. You have no articulable facts to support detention. You have no legal basis to demand identification. You have no grounds for arrest. What you have is a stack of constitutional violations and a recording that will end your career. Milhouse's eyes narrowed. He stepped forward, one hand moving toward the handcuffs on his belt. Last warning. Margaret lifted her phone slightly, just enough for him to see the screen. The doorbell camera app was still open, the red recording indicator glowing in the corner. The live feed showed him standing in her living room, his hand on his cuffs, his face tight with anger. It's all recorded, she said quietly. Video, audio, cloud storage. You broke into my home. You threatened me. You lied on the radio. And now you're about to put your hands on me without legal justification. Milhouse froze. His hand hovered over the handcuffs. For the first time, something shifted in his expression, not fear, not yet, but calculation. He was weighing options, assessing risk. Margaret pressed forward, her voice never rising, never shaking.
You can leave now or you can continue. But if you touch me, if you arrest me, if you do anything other than walk out that door, you will lose. Not in the moment, not tonight, but in court. In depositions, in front of a jury, you will lose everything. Milhouse's jaw worked. He wanted to respond, wanted to reassert control, but the words didn't come. The apartment felt too quiet. The camera lens too small and too present at the same time. He took a step back. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice lower now, less certain. Margaret shook her head slowly. "No, officer." "You already did." Milhouse stared at her for another long moment, his hand still resting on his belt. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the door. His boots echoed on the hardwood. He stepped into the hallway, pulled the door closed behind him, and disappeared toward the elevator. Margaret stood in her living room, alone again, the phone still warm in her hand. The camera had captured everything. Margaret Holloway did not call the police department that night. She called her late husband's law partner. At 12:14 a.m., Robert Chen answered his phone on the second ring. He'd worked alongside Samuel Holloway for 18 years, handling civil rights cases, police misconduct suits, and federal Section 1983 claims. He knew Margaret well. He also knew she wouldn't call unless it was serious. She told him what happened, every detail, the forced entry, the threats, the illegal detention attempt. The officer's name, badge number, and the fact that everything was recorded. Robert was silent for a moment. Then he said the words that would set the machinery in motion. "Margaret, do you still have access to Samuel's case files?" "Yes, they're right here." "Good, start a folder, label it Holloway v. Milhouse. I'll file a federal complaint tomorrow morning. But first, I'm sending you a preservation letter template. You're going to email it to the police chief, the city attorney, and the department's internal affairs division tonight." Right now, Margaret opened her laptop. Her hands were steady. Within 20 minutes, the email was sent. Subject: preservation of evidence, unlawful entry and detention to Chief of Police, City Attorney, Internal Affairs Division. The email was 2 paragraphs. Formal, clinical. It identified Officer Derek Milhouse by name and badge number. It described the incident in factual terms: unlawful entry, Fourth Amendment violation, threats, false detention attempt. It demanded the immediate preservation of all body-worn camera footage, dispatch recordings, radio transmissions, and personnel records. It was signed, Margaret Holloway, surviving spouse of Samuel Holloway-esque. The name meant nothing to Officer Milhouse, but it meant everything to the department. Samuel Holloway had sued the city 4 times in his career. 3 of those cases had resulted in settlements totaling over $1.2 million. The 4th had gone to trial, and the jury had awarded $340,000 in damages plus attorney's fees. His name was in case law. His depositions were used in training seminars as examples of how not to let an attorney dismantle your testimony. When the email arrived in the inbox of the Internal Affairs Lieutenant at 12:51 a.m., he opened it immediately. He read it twice. Then he forwarded it to the chief with a single line: "We have a problem." By 7:00 a.m., Officer Derek Milhouse was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. By 9:00 a.m., the doorbell camera footage had been reviewed by 3 supervisors, the city attorney, and the department's legal advisor. By 10:30 a.m., the city's insurance carrier was contacted. The footage was damning, crystal clear. The audio was worse. Every word Milhouse had said, every threat, every dismissive comment, every refusal to explain himself, was recorded in high definition. The timestamp showed the exact moment he forced the lock. The angle showed his face, his badge, his body language. There was no defense. The city attorney watched the video once, paused it, and said to the room, "We settle, immediately." Margaret Holloway had not raised her voice, had not filed a complaint, had not demanded anything except that the officer leave her home, but she had done something more powerful. She had been Samuel Holloway's wife for 34 years. And she had learned everything. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. The meeting took place in a windowless conference room on the 4th floor of City Hall at 2:00 p.m. the following day. Present, the chief of police, 2 deputy chiefs, the city attorney, the head of internal affairs, a representative from the city's insurance carrier, and a lawyer from the firm that handled the city's liability defense. No one spoke for the first 30 seconds. The doorbell camera footage played on the screen mounted to the wall. Margaret Holloway's voice, calm and precise. Officer Millhouse's voice, dismissive and threatening. The sound of the lock turning, the door opening. The illegal entry captured in 1080p resolution. When the video ended, the insurance representative spoke first. How many times has he been complained against? 3, the internal affairs lieutenant said. All unfounded. Were they actually unfounded or were they just closed? Silence. The city attorney leaned forward, elbows on the table, fingers pressed to his temples. His name was Paul Grenish, and he'd been with the city for 11 years. He defended officers in excessive force cases, wrongful arrest suits, and First Amendment retaliation claims. He'd won some. Lost others, but this was different. This wasn't a case of competing narratives. There was no he said, she said. There was video, there was audio. There was a timestamp showing Millhouse at the wrong apartment. There was a radio transmission where he lied about his location. There was a 72-year-old woman in a bathrobe calmly reciting case law, while an officer threatened to arrest her for refusing to comply with unlawful orders. And the woman was Samuel Holloway's widow. Grenish had lost to Samuel Holloway twice in his career. Both times, Holloway had shredded the city's defense in depositions, introduced body camera footage that contradicted officer testimony, and walked the jury through the Constitution like they were law students. Both cases had settled before verdict. The third case Holloway had brought against the city had gone to trial, and the jury had returned a plaintiff's verdict in under 2 hours. Grenish knew exactly what was about to happen. "We have no defense," he said quietly. The police chief looked at him. "What do you mean, no defense?" "I mean we have no defense. The entry was illegal. The detention was illegal. The threats are on tape." She invoked her rights clearly. She identified every violation in real time. She told him he was creating a federal case, and he kept going. A first-year law student could win this. The insurance representative closed her laptop. "Then we settle." "For how much?" one of the deputy chiefs asked. Grenish exhaled slowly. He'd seen the case law. Warrantless entry into a home was one of the most egregious Fourth Amendment violations possible. Add the victim's age, the officer's attitude, the recorded threats, and the fact that she was legally sophisticated enough to articulate every violation as it was happening, and the damages started climbing fast. Emotional distress, constitutional violations, unlawful detention, civil rights deprivation under Section 1983, Grenish said, counting on his fingers. Her attorney is Robert Chen. He worked with her husband for 18 years. He knows what juries do with cases like this. The room was silent. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang twice and went quiet. "How much?" the chief asked again. Grenish met his eyes. "If this goes to trial, we're looking at $250,000 in compensatory damages, easy, maybe more. Add punitive damages against the officer, possibly against the city if Chen argues we had notice of prior complaints and failed to act. And you're looking at $500,000, maybe more. Plus attorney's fees, which in a civil rights case get awarded to the plaintiff. That's another $100,000 minimum." The insurance representative nodded slowly. "We'll authorize settlement negotiations, cap it at $865,000. The chief's face went pale. "Jesus Christ." "It gets worse," Grenish said. "Chen's going to demand policy changes. Body camera activation policies, disciplinary transparency, training reforms. He's going to put the department under a microscope. And if we fight him, if we take this to trial and lose, the jury can award whatever they want. I've seen civil rights verdicts go over $1 million. The internal affairs lieutenant spoke up. "What happens to Millhouse?" "He's done," Grenish said flatly. "Termination, no appeal, no grievance. We can't defend this. If we try to keep him, Chen will argue we ratified the conduct. That opens us up to even more liability." The chief nodded slowly, his jaw tight. Officer Derek Millhouse's career ended that afternoon. The termination letter was drafted by 4:00 p.m. By 5:00 p.m., his badge and service weapon had been surrendered. By the end of the week, his name would be flagged in the state's decertification database, ensuring he would never work as a police officer again. The settlement offer was transmitted to Robert Chen's office on October 18th, 4 days after the incident. $865,000, full policy reforms, public acknowledgement of constitutional violations. Margaret Holloway accepted on October 22nd. The city issued a press release calling it a regrettable incident and emphasizing their commitment to accountability and transparency. They did not mention Officer Milhouse by name. They did not admit fault, but the money spoke louder than any statement. The footage never went to trial, but it didn't need to. The system had already realized it was trapped. Margaret Holloway did not spend the settlement money on herself. She donated $200,000 to a civil rights legal defense fund in her husband's name. She set aside another portion for a scholarship at the law school he'd graduated from. The rest she kept, not as a victory, but as a reminder. The doorbell camera that recorded everything cost $89. The knowledge to recognize her rights in the moment. That came from 34 years of living with a man who believed the Constitution wasn't just words on paper, but a shield that only worked if you knew how to hold it. Officer Derek Milhouse never worked in law enforcement again. His decertification became a footnote in a system that produces 1,000 similar stories every year. Officers who see compliance as submission, authority as an entitlement, and accountability as an obstacle. But here's what makes this case different. Margaret Holloway wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't an activist. She wasn't recording for social media or trying to make a point. She was a 72-year-old retired English teacher who installed a doorbell camera because she lived alone and wanted to feel safe. And when an officer broke into her home, threatened her, and tried to arrest her for refusing to comply with illegal orders, she didn't panic. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She recited case law. Because she'd been listening for 34 years. The footage from that night is stored on a server somewhere, time-stamped and backed up in triplicate per the settlement agreement. It will never be made public. Margaret requested that, not to protect the department, but because she didn't need the world to see it. The people who mattered had already seen it. The people who wrote the check. The people who ended a career. The people who realized too late that the wrong person had opened the door. But the real question isn't whether Officer Milhouse should have lost his job. The real question is how many others are still working. How many officers have forced entry on the wrong home, threatened the wrong person, lied on the radio, and walked away because there was no camera, no recording. No widow who knew the law well enough to name every violation as it happened. Margaret Holloway got $865,000 because she had the tools and the knowledge to fight back. But how many people have neither? If this can happen to a 72-year-old woman in her own home, someone who didn't resist, didn't escalate, didn't do anything except ask a single reasonable question, then who is actually safe? The system didn't fail because Officer Milhouse was uniquely bad. It failed because nothing stopped him until he targeted someone who knew exactly how to make it hurt. If you found this story valuable, share it, talk about it, and if you learned something, hit subscribe. These stories matter. The next one might matter to you.